You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
It's the KCSN Draft Show presented by Miller Lights. Eric Galko, director of the East West Shrine Bowl. Hi, what's good?
We're in draft season, man. We're in April. We made it. We made it.
Wait, we just got here? We just got to draft season? Are we sure?
That's what it feels like a little bit, if I'm being honest. Hi, Maddie Lane.
Oh, I'm hanging out. I've been in draft season for about 11 and a half months now, so we're ready. We're ready to go.
We better be in draft season because the KCSN draft guide is available. It releases today.
Now?
You're listening to this on Wednesday. Yes. Big day for all of us, obviously, at KC Sports Network. The draft guide is out. Link is in the description of the show. You get it for $12.99. You get 300 plus pages of Chiefs-specific content. You get 3 months to the KCSN Substack. All that good stuff. The book is out. Big day for all of us. Let's party by talking about the offensive line. We're going to do the entirety of the offensive line, interior and exterior, as we were joking earlier to start the show. But
all terriers
will be covered today, as they should. And I'm gonna start with this. This is one of the conversations we typically like to start with the show. We'll start with the tackles. Galko, how many tackles do you think wind up going in the first round of this draft?
I was literally writing down and counting the tackles as you were saying, because I saw where you were going.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be quite a bit, and I think it's because what was the draft with Tristan Wirfs and Mekhi Becton were like 4 that went and like 5 or 6 picks. That was like 2 years ago. I think we'll see a very similar run to that. And then I think, as always, we've said a couple times now with other positions, back in round 1, our playoff teams, once in a while they can use a skill guy, right? Once in a while it's a team that shouldn't be there because of a trade, and they are the wild card, but it's usually O-line and DBs, right? Every playoff team, I wish I had one more O-line and one more DB. So I think we'll see a 4 or 5 go with 4 pick 2021, and then maybe 1 or 2 sneak in the back in round 1 as well, just because those guys are still valuable. It's not a very strong offensive tackle class, especially after round 1, which I think drives from that too. So to give you a number, I think the number I'd say is 6, 6.5, 7, somewhere in that range, but it's going to be probably 1 more than people are thinking right now.
And so that draft you were referencing was the 2020 draft. And you had 4 of them went in the top 13. And then you had Austin Jackson and Isaiah Wilson slip into the middle in the latter part of round 1s. And, maybe those teams would maybe want those picks back. I don't know. That's a different discussion for a different day. But that's what happens when you're not going to have the deepest, I think, tackle class. I don't know. I agree it's not overly strong, but the top guys are still pretty good. I think you feel very fine if you come out with the Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, Skoronski, so on and so forth. It's just after round 1, you don't have any confidence with those guys you're taking. So, I think you might see DeJuan. I don't want to name everybody, so we're going to get to it, but DeJuan Jones, Anton Harrison, you might see some guys slide into the back of round 1 that you don't feel as strongly about, and other years might be day 2 picks just because of what this class looks like and how early the tackles will come off the board.
So, Galko, I know we've had conversations not on this show before, and I know you're a big fan of Paris Johnson Jr. Do you think he's OT1 in this class still?
Yeah, no, I think he's, for me, it's a gap after him. I think he's the clear guy. I think he's incredibly athletic, maturity, all the stuff off the field. Usually offensive linemen are pretty easygoing guys. When they're not, I think for most teams it should be a red flag. I think for guys like Paris, when they're like above and beyond, like Paris has the personality and just the mental makeup that he could be any position to be impressive that spot too. So I think I'd be surprised if he wasn't the first offensive lineman on the board. In fact, I think someone will trade up into the top 10 to go get him. I think that's how good he is.
Wow.
Now, if you drafted him, would you have him lined up with his back to the defense and 180 into his pass set?
Jump. Yeah, exactly. Yes, I'd have him jump pass set and get 15 yards of depth straight back, and then I'd have him do that too, just to impress too. Yeah, so
it's fair, I think, and fun to critique that, but also when you watch that, it just shows the case is a lot of athleticism, and yes, you want to see a guy at his pro day take some normal pass sets and do some stuff that might relate to the field, but I love seeing that because how many other offensive tackles can look like that?
Absolutely, man. Hot take, a lot of workouts are kind of just whatever, man. Everyone watch, oh, look how smooth he looks. And no, I mean, I always joke with my staff, if you just say hip fluidity, it's just a made-up term, I feel. No one knows really what it means, but we just say it, right? But I think, I don't know, I remember, this is probably 10 years ago, Jerron Gilbert from San Jose State jumped out of a pool and went third round because of it. But I was that's awesome. I don't want to screw with that kind of guy. So more what's a TV show, whatever that was, but more like unbelievable videos of these guys doing athletic feats more than just like doing kick slides and running the hoop drill. Who cares?
Right.
Do some backflips and stuff.
Yes, please. Anthony Richardson out there doing his gymnastics.
Exactly.
So, okay, I agree with you. I think Paris Johnson has separated himself in the I don't even say like media's eye, just like in the NFL's eye. He's probably going to be the first tackle taken. I think that's a pretty safe bet now. I think the conversation really begins kind of after that, because I think Peter Skoronski is a guy that a lot of people had pegged as the best tackle, but then you start looking at the arm length, and then you know once you know the arm length, you watch the film, you're like, oh, I think I see it showing up here, and you start looking for it times where it shows up, and I think you can find some if you hunt it down. Broderick Jones out of Georgia doesn't have a ton of experience playing left tackle. He didn't start that many games, so he's still developing some of his technique, but the raw athleticism's there. I think Darnell Wright maybe has had the best process of all these tackles. So who's next for you after Paris Johnson? Where do you go after him?
Yeah, I think Darnell Wright is a guy that's certainly been helped by the process. I do think that people in the media have kind of overcorrected a little bit, where he's not going to be a top 10, 12, 15 pick, but I think teams went from a guy that was a early day 3, late day 2 guy, early part of the season going into the year, that transition into a first round pick, at worst case back in round 1, but I think he's a guy that has a right tackle plug and play. He's a guy you want to like. I think Broderick Jones has a ton of talent and a ton of upside. I have not had a chance to speak to Broderick, so that's with less experience. You want to make sure that the character is really, really there, but talent-wise, he's the next guy to Paris shots for me just because he's so impressive. And then on the safer route, Peter Skoronski, I think the arm length, I was actually on a Bears radio show a couple weeks back, and they were asking about Skoronski because obviously he's like the most mocked Bear player of all time. And they were like, why does arm length matter? And arm length doesn't matter in terms of play-to-play. What it does is it minimizes risk if you have longer arms. You can make more mistakes if you have longer arms, and that's what it does. Just like a quarterback that has a stronger arm, you can be later on a read and still make the throw. And that's what Anthony Richardson has, that Brock Purdy has, but Brock Purdy is way more accurate, way more on time, way more efficient. I take Brock Purdy right now. And same for an offensive tackle. Like, I take a lot of guys with longer arms, but Skoronski is so impressive play to play that I think he's a guy at tackle. And I think a lot of teams feel that Skoronski, worst case, is a really good guard. And then the one guy you had mentioned, we'll go to him in a second, I'm sure, because I know he's been mocked to the Chiefs in the past. I don't think he'll be there, but Anton Harrison is someone that I think media still hasn't caught up with yet of how early he's going to go. I'll be very, very surprised if Anton Harrison leaves the top 20 overall picks in this draft.
I think he's OT3 for us right now, if I remember.
That's good. Yeah, that's right.
He's OT3.
We have Skoronski as a guard. That's why, but still, he's still right there. 4-3, and what's the difference, right?
So I'm gonna reel off these tackles real quick.
Yeah.
Going round 1: Paris Johnson Jr., Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, Darnell Wright, Peter Skoronski, DeJuan Jones. Is that the 6 that go in the first round? We think if we're getting 6 in there.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a play. I think Jalen Duncan of Maryland could be a guy that's in play as well too. But that sounds like the 6. That would be it'd be those 5, and then it'd be one more that slides in.
So I'm glad you went to Jalen Duncan. I'm kind of fascinated by him because I think one of the perspectives is like, okay, you're gonna get a bunch in the first round. Jalen Duncan, how long do we think he has to wait to hear his name called if it's not him in the first round? Or a DeJuan Jones, OT 7, offensive tackle 7, like how early we think those guys are called.
Yeah, and it's crazy too. I think not going to be that long in the draft either. But the funny part is, I'm talking with teams, is that there's not enough to offensive tackles that most teams have as draftable. We'll get the later round guys later on. That then they need for the draft, right? Every year there's usually a quota of offensive tackles, like a minimum and like usually a historic high, and we're like barely hitting those minimums at offensive tackle, which I think is going to tell teams to say, hey, you know what? I've got to adjust my draft board. That's what these meetings are right now in early April, to kind of finish the draft board. But really behind the scenes, after those meetings are done, head coach, GM, other executives are saying, all right, we finished this position group, but now let's say, where does next year's class look like? Where does our roster look like? And then what does the rest of the draft look like? I think a lot of people are going to say, you know what? Even though we think DeJuan Jones, Jalen Duncan, Blake Freeland, even guys like Carter Warren, who's been hurt but still really talented, we may think they're late day 2, early day 3 fringe starters, but we got to get those guys earlier because there's not going to be a guy, even a swing tackle around 4 or 5. That doesn't really exist this year at that high level.
And so when you have a class, I mean, kind of like that is a little bit lighter on tackles, a lot lighter on tackles than normal, what do you do with guys like a Tyler Steen or a Matthew Bergeron, who some people have talked about as guards? Do you think that increases their chances to get tried out, get drafted, and given a shot at tackle? Or do you think most teams are still going to stand pat and kind of dig their heels and say, no, we thought this guy was a guard, we're going to treat him as such?
No, for sure. I mean, I think the philosophy of most teams, except for some teams that have really, really strong O-line coach presence who kind of really have to find looks at guys, is most teams, if you can't play tackle, can you play center? If you can't play center, okay, you'll play guard. And I think most teams have that mindset. And I think especially in this class, hey, you know what, Bergeron might be a guard for us. But I think if a team is getting Matt Bergeron on day 2, especially if it's mid day 2 or early day 2, and they're taking him at guard, that's a heck of a luxury in this draft class. I think most teams are going to want that tackle opportunity for a guy like him. You don't want to reach for a tackle necessarily and say, hey, I'm not sure Matt Bergeron myself is a plug-and-play starter to be a mid to early round 2 pick, but he's a really good football player, and if I need a corner and a tackle, I'll take the tackle first and hope I get lucky at corner as an example. But I think to answer your question, all these guys will get tried at tackle first and foremost before they transition to guard. I think Duncan, Steen, you mentioned Bergeron. Like, I think all 3 of those guys might be better off at tackle, but they're going to get every single chance at guard for sure. I'm sorry, tackle for sure.
I kind of wonder too. Like you're saying, hey, we think 6 tackles are going off. You can debate, maybe 1 or 2 of the merits of them going that late potentially, but this weirdness of this draft, it kind of feels like it's like all over the map. Where there's a lot of people said, hey, these people's boards might look a lot different after you get past 10. And I wonder if it's just kind of the same thing. Like there's going to be some surprises in round 2, in day 2 at the tackle spot that we're not thinking of right now because of just varying preferences and stuff like that. So do you think there's some surprise names at the tackle position that could wind up going on day 2?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned one Carter Warren. I think he's someone that almost came out last year, would have been a top 100 pick a year ago. He played better this year, I thought, got hurt towards the end of the year, tried to recover and hustle up for the Shrine Bowl, wasn't able to get healthy, and then, just interviewed, kind of got ruled out the day of the Shrine Bowl practices starting, and then, kind of started getting cleared up the rest of the draft process. But I think he's a guy that we've forgotten about, because usually those guys that stay an extra year, or then something happens, or they get hurt, we kind of forget about them. But yeah, if he ends up being a mid to late day 2 pick, or even firm round 2 pick, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So him, mentioned Freeland, Jalen Duncan, a lot of those guys, like I don't think any of those guys are going to escape the early part of round 3, just because there's a huge scarcity at that spot.
So we're talking about guys that might sneak into the top, 100 here. So I got to bring up one of my guys in this draft, Nick Saldiveri out of Old Dominion. Been on him for a while, and we were kind of talking about these guys that have the versatility to play inside, outside stuff. And I think that's the safety net, and something that I really like about him is I have no doubt that he can come in and play guard. I don't know why, if he can snap the ball. Obviously, I haven't seen him attempt to snap the ball, but if he can snap the ball, why he couldn't play center. So here's the guy that I'm a lot higher on, I think, than a lot of other people. And when you start looking at his tackle class, he's a guy like, I don't necessarily think he's going to go in the top 100, but if he does, I'm not completely surprised by it because of that versatility. And if you go and look at the physical traits, I'm not ready to rule him out being able to play at offensive tackle in the NFL. He has the size, all the measurables you want. I just think he needs a little bit of work or anything like that. So where do you feel about him kind of maybe sneaking into the back in day 2?
I'll tell you, I think a lot of teams think he could play center. I know a couple teams that have him on their board as a center. Now, granted, it's actually become a really strong center class just because a lot of guys have shown that. Guys like Cedric Van Pran would have been the first center taken. He went back to school. So I think the top end is not like an obvious first-round guy, although I wouldn't be surprised if one guy was one of those surprise guys in late round 1 that can play center. But I think, Nick Saldiveri or the Shrine Bowl, Jordan McFadden, who played tackle at Clemson, he played tackle and guard. Now he's going to play center. John Gaines, UCLA, another guard, going to center too. So I think a lot of these guys are not necessarily tackles, but guys like Saldiveri, a lot of teams want to have these guys play center first. So I think Saldiveri will be drafted as a center. But to your point, I think if he goes early round 3, and some teams like, you know what, let's just make sure he can't play tackle before going to center. But I think he could be up to the center, not as a tackle.
Andy X seems like a guy that would really like Nick Saldiveri here in Kansas City just because of that positional versatility. He'd probably give him a chance to try to play tackle and hold up out there before he kicks him inside. We're going to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Whether you're a Chiefs, Royals, Sporting KC, KC Current, K-State, KU, or Mizzou fan, we've got you covered. Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network. proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Kansas City, the NFL draft is almost here. It's a fantastic time for our city. Make sure you're staying locked into us here at KC Sports Network because we've got the draft covered. Chiefs have 10 picks. We'll see how many they actually use, but there's one selection that every football fan can share, and that's an ice-cold Miller Lite. The players change, the coaches change, the rules change, but Miller Lite is still the perfect beer for draft time, game time, and everything in between. Personally, when I want a beer with some flavor but also is light, won't make me feel like crap, Miller Lite has been a go-to. Light on calories, not taste. What's the point of drinking beer if you can't taste it? That is Miller Lite. Great taste, 96 calories. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/KCSN, or you can pick up some Miller Lite pretty much anywhere they sell beer. It's Miller time. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 96 calories and 3.2 carbs per ounce. Could probably use a few right now, I'm sure, as we're continuing to go through this offensive line. I think this offensive line group has had a few Miller Lights as well in their days. Okay, so Galko, I want to hear from you about some, guys that are going to surprise, maybe go a little bit earlier than we're anticipating, at the tackle spot. Day one, it doesn't have to necessarily be day 2 now, day 3, just some guys that, you're well connected. You're hearing some opinions on some guys. Who's the process been good for some of the guys like at the Shrine Bowl?
Yeah, well, I think one guy out of the Shrine Bowl who I think teams bring up quite a bit is Tyler Steen. You kind of mentioned him earlier, Matt, but I think he's a guy that teams kind of always bring up. Again, a high character guy, played at Bama, kind of underappreciated, transferred from Vanderbilt, so kind of a little bit on the radar compared to other tackles at Alabama. I'm not sure he's a plug-and-play NFL starter, but I think for most teams, he's pretty damn close. At the Shrine Bowl-wise, we had bunch of good tackles. I think a bunch of really long, impressive guys. Obviously, Carter Warren was one, I think, be the first one drafted. He just couldn't get clear for the Shrine Bowl. But athletic-wise, John Ojukwu, Earl Bostic from Boise State and Kansas, respectively, they'll both be draft picks. They're kind of both developmental offensive tackles. Dalton Wagner is 6'8", massive human being. He'll be a guy that's a right tackle in the NFL. He'd probably be a starter, not unlike Dan Skipper. Played in the league for 10 years as a really tall offensive tackle. But one guy's had an incredible process, and I'll ask our buddy Kent over at Math Bomb. But Trevor Reed of Louisville had one of, if not the most athletic pro day combine performances in offensive tackle history, especially as a guard, which I think is what teams think he might be, being that he's a little shorter, 6'4", and arm length is good, not great for that spot either. But I think teams are going to try him on his tackle because he's so athletic. But he's a guy that's gone from a very intriguing former Freaks list, former 5-star JUCO guy, into a guy that I think teams have started to see mature and kind of figure out some things to the position at the Shrine Bowl and during the draft process that, hey, when you're that big and you run a 4.9 40 and you jump a vert and a broad like he did with 3 cones, a short shuttle, it's all there, especially as a guard too. I think he's as a late day 3 tackle and maybe an early day 3 guard. They can go somewhere on mid to early day 3 because he's so damn athletic.
2 of the guys that you mentioned there were kind of in my notes from when we were down there at the Shrine Bowl was Ojukwu out of Boise State and then Trevor Reed. And Reed I had seen going into it, so I was already kind of on the lookout for him, and I was just as impressed there as I was watching the film. But I hadn't watched Ojukwu until we got down there, and just his movement and the way he was able to use his length, it was just something that kind of stood out there compared to some of the other guys. You guys had really good pass rushers down there, and he was able, I thought, to handle them relatively well compared to a lot of the other guys, and you're dealing with one-on-one. So I'm glad you mentioned those 2. I'm going to ask you about a guy. I don't think he went to an All-Star game. Maybe he did. I just missed it. But Jake Witt out of Northern Michigan. And nobody know anything about him until you come out of the pro day, and he blew it up. So, have you got to see anything about Jake Witt?
Yeah, no. I knew. I got tipped off on Jake by an area scout preseason, and just that he's got to add weight. He's going to continue to add weight. He was lighter in college. Well, he's got to keep adding weight. But I had gotten tipped off by some of the athletic numbers. Obviously, I didn't know, A, they'd be that impressive, and B, it's hard to bank on something like that. And usually, hey, my philosophy has always been at the Shrine Bowl, I just want the best athletes here as we can, right? Especially when guys are more late round picks. Give me Trevor Reed every day because that guy has a chance to make it in the NFL for a long, long time. We've had good success with that, having great players there. But Jake was a guy that was certainly on our radar up until the very end. I think just he's going to be a P squad guy. I'm not sure he gets picked because of that, because hey, he's going to be a guy you have to redshirt at least 1 year or maybe 2 years. But man, if you find a guy on P Squad, the way NFL contracts work, basically, if you find a guy on P Squad becomes a roster player, you've got him for like 4 years minimum right after that. So you kind of really control those guys. So developing a guy like Jake Wood on a P Squad is really valuable too. But he's one of the more intriguing, I would say unlikely, if not very unlikely to be drafted, but a guy that's a good call by you because I think some smart team's going to take him on a P Squad or say, hey, we hope he doesn't get picked. Or if he does, late 7th round to say, hey, we got a guy that we can develop for 2 years and see how he does. But he's going to be some good offensive line coach's favorite project for the next year and a half.
Hey, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're watching it. Appreciate everybody that's hanging out watching this or listening to this. Make sure you are following everything going on KC Sports Network. We've got plenty going here. Now it's time to move to the interior offensive line. So we talked about the tackles. Let's talk about the interior guys. Same question off the top. How many interior offensive line we think are going off the board in this draft, Galko?
In the first round?
First round. Yeah, I should probably clarify.
Yeah, the whole draft, it's hard enough for to kind of top my head.
Tally those up.
Carry the one.
I'm not going to include Peter Skoronski. I know you guys have him in the draft guide as a guard. I'll kind of exclude him because we count on him for the tackles. I'm going to say just one. I think there's a chance for a second. Luke Weipler at Ohio State is a guy that I think has a little more NFL interest than people realize right now. I don't think Joe Chipman does, but he's also a wild card just because even interior offensive line, not as deep. But one, Osiris Torrance, who I think is a pretty damn special prospect in this draft.
I remember we were talking a few weeks ago, and you said how much you love Osiris Torrance.
Yeah.
Like super highly regarded for you personally and your team doing their work. What is it about Osiris Torrance that makes him a special prospect in your eyes?
I think first off, he's an athletic guard. He's a guard only, which I think helps the evaluation because we talked earlier about tackles to play center, and you kind of get lost a little bit. It's like, all right, what is this guy if he's not this? Like, Osiris is a guard. That's it. Can play both sides, but a plug-and-play NFL guard. But he's athletic for that spot, can really bend and sink. I've seen him adjust off balance, left to right in the A-gap, help a center out, to reach on a blitzer. But, man, he just dominated his whole college career. He was a guy that I thought should have came out, a year ago at Louisiana and just be a top 2-round pick a year ago because I thought he just dominated in an NFL-type way, right? Not just a guy who finishes the ground for fun against, 260-pound defensive tackles, defensive ends. Like, this is a guy who would finish with control, with patience, with the hand strength, the violence, but also the being under control. I remember a guy at Louisiana Lafayette, Kevin Dotson, ended up being, I think, a 4th-round pick. Like, those two guys dominated in similar ways, but Osiris being so much more athletic was I think so impressive. So Osiris, the guy that I think is a plug-and-play NFL starter for the next 10 years. Again, I think I said to you guys before, I think he's a notch down from Zach Martin as a prospect on Notre Dame almost a decade ago. I think he's a notch down and, again, a multi-time Pro Bowler for sure.
Well, I mean, he's huge for a guard. 6'5", 330, and like 34 inch arms, or just under 30. Like, that's a massive guard, and we're talking about the NFL nowadays where everyone kind of shifted to spreading it out, outside zone. We're going to stretch everybody out, but now there's a little bit of a swing back the other way. And not that Torrance can't go play in any scheme. I'm not saying that. It's just if you give me the option to get a 330-pound guard that can move a little bit and then also get a run duo or power like right behind him, that's pretty fun. So like I think he's clearly the best interior offensive lineman as well from this class. The other two guys you see a lot pop up in round one are Steve Avila out of TCU, and then a lot of John Michael Schmitz, a different center, has gotten some hype as a potential round one pick. I don't have him there. You gave me that little side eye. I didn't say I put him there, Galko. I'm just saying he's another name that pops up in round one. So do we think either one of those guys can even make a push towards the end of it?
I don't think so, no. I like John Michael Schmitz. I think he's a little more scheme-specific, and I'd be surprised if a guy like him goes as early. But I guess I wouldn't rule it out. Again, these are playoff teams, and if you're a team that's a center away, you think you're a center away, then forget your draft board. Just get that guy in round one if you can get him too. But I think I think they'll be, I would say the over-under is 1.5 at an inter-offensive line too, but probably more juice on the over happening than the under, put it that way, because I think there'll be one surprise guy there on the offensive line. I think Steve Avila, very nice player. I think he's NFL offensive guard who could play center. I think some teams I know have him as kind of a worst case scenario. He's a great backup at both spots or all 3 spots in the interior. Maybe he's a guy who can start first as well too, but again, I don't think teams are as in love with this interior offensive line class as I thought they would be in the past too. But those are two guys that, again, I'd be surprised if they were late round one. And the crazy thing is that they definitely could be considered round one, but we forget every year that round two is like almost as crazy as round one because teams have different needs, but they miss on a round one. And the guy that almost goes late one goes late too sometimes. So don't be surprised if guys like Weipler or Tippmann or John Michael Schmitz or Steve Avila are considered late round 1, and I'm going mid to late round 2 as well.
That's why I'm going to cut you off real quick, Kent. I'm sorry. I got one more thing here. The guy said before you move off of him. Tippmann's a guy that I actually really like, and I think you look at the way the center positions kind of changed in the NFL. You have your best centers now, not all of them, but a lot of them are guys that you can kind of run your running game through. You find a way to weaponize your center and get them on the move. And when I watch Tippmann, that's what I see. I see a center that I think you can put out there in a wide zone scheme. You can ask him to go pull a little bit and kind of be that key, the linchpin to your run game. I'm a little surprised that there hasn't been more hype for him going into this, because usually super athletic centers that have proven they can get out on the move and have success running behind them kind of get propped up in these kind of process. So I've been a little surprised that he hasn't gotten more hype as we lead up to the draft.
I don't disagree with you. I think everyone's looking for centers and for tackles who can allow you to play 5-man protection. And I think it's the first and foremost teams I want to have, right? Hey, if I can have my running back or tight end not chip and get downfield, I get an extra route runner. But that takes length at center, guard, and tackle, right, to prevent the A-gap, B-gap blitzes, and as well as athleticism and space in the run game to make sure you're not just hamstringing yourself with fewer tight ends out there. But no, again, I think Tippmann, I think it's a little bit of pick your flavor. I like the Ohio State guy. Some teams like Tippmann, some teams like John Michael Schmitz. I think they're all very different, right? I think John Michael Schmitz is not really at all like Joe Tippmann. They can move pretty well, but they're kind of different sizes, different play styles as well too. So again, I lean towards Ohio State, Luke Weipler, with him being the number 2 guy as well too. But I think Tippmann's a pretty damn intriguing center that I think if he works out, again, I thought he was going to stay another year in college, but he had to come out early. So I think teams a little bit wanted to see a little bit more of him, but certainly a really dynamic talent at center, which is pretty hard to find.
I have some day 2-3 questions on the interior offensive line I'm going to ask right after this.
Whether you're a Chiefs, Royals, Sporting KC, KC Current, K-State, KU, or Mizzou fan, we've got you covered. Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Thanks for watching. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Appreciate everybody that is hanging out. All your draft content you'll ever need as it relates to the Chiefs is here at KC Sports Network. So make sure you're following everything we've got going on. Speaking of the Chiefs, being Chiefs specific, being KC specific here, the Chiefs kind of have a decent interior offensive line. Some would say the best interior offensive line in football. I might be a little biased, but I look at, I asked the question about, interior linemen in round 1. We're obviously I wish 6 guys would fall off the board along the interior in round 1, but I want to expand that to round 2 because I think those first 2 picks are going to be very interesting for the Chiefs. I would be very surprised if they were to take an interior offensive lineman. We got Torrance, Avila, Mauk, Cody Mauk, John Michael Schmitz, Tippmann, Weipler. That's 6 there. Are all 6 of those guys off the board before the Chiefs are picking at 63, do we think?
I'm not positive Cody Mauk is. Okay. In fact, I don't think he's picked at that point. I think he's going to be more of a late day 2 kind of guy, just talking with teams. I think some teams like him. I think he's a little more of a I think teams trying to figure out where he's going to play in the NFL, right? I think he's shown he can play tackle, but teams kind of have those question marks. I know he did some center at the Senior Bowl, and that was okay, but not great. Struggle there a little bit too. So I think teams appreciate the desire to be versatile, but again, I always go back to all right, what's going to do for me tomorrow? I'm not sure NFL teams view Cody Mauk as a guy that can help us start any point tomorrow in the NFL too. So he's the one guy I think will be there, if not fall past him as well.
I want to know from you, any of those, is there any other guys that might be gone in round 2 before the Chiefs are picking, though? Is there anybody that you see could potentially be along the interior?
Braden Daniels of Utah. He's a guard tackle, but I think he's viewed mostly by teams a guard. I think he'll be gone by that point as well, too. Those are the only guys I think will be interior guys, definitely gone by pick 64.
I think it's been interesting to see Galko. There's been some love recently for Chandler Zavala out of North Carolina State. It seems like people are hyped
out of nowhere. Nobody knew it was coming, right, Galko?
Yeah, I knew it was coming.
It's just there's a lot of love for him, and yeah. I just you've got pretty good knowledge of Chandler Zavala a little bit. What do you think about him?
Yeah, man, I think it's been awesome. Him and non-interior offensive lineman Kobe Turner have gotten a lot of attention leading up to the draft, which is much deserved. And I'm super happy for those guys because I kind of told those guys not getting a combine invite. I told a lot of guys, but especially those were two of probably the 4 or 5 I talked to and actually had a call with them like, hey, don't worry about this. I know the teams that agree with me and like you this way, and the draft's crazy, but like just keep your head down and keep moving forward. I think Chandler never wavered on that. He's a guy that came from a small school up to NC State. And I know that he recognized a year ago that like, oh, I can play with these big guys. Like I think he had that moment really early on, and it's really hard to go from D2 FCS to a Power 5 school. We know the guys that make it. I promise you, there's like 90% of guys that just never play again. And it's just really hard to kind of go from those smaller schools to play up. And I think Chandler realized he could do that right away. But the rare trait that I think that's what makes him a really safe NFL offensive lineman. What makes him a top 100 pick, which I think he will go there and be the highest drafted non-combine guy in the last 5-6 years, is because he's so damn athletic. I think scouts just missed. I think scouts just didn't realize how impressive he was in space a year ago and didn't have good expectation coming into the year too. And we were surprised, and I was surprised that he was, again, like Kobe Turner, like a couple other guys that didn't get the NFL feedback at the highest level in terms of draft grades early on in our process. And, our first invites, I want to rely a lot on NFL teams to do our own job. But, hey, I want to make sure we have the guys that teams want to see. But as those second invites came out, we just had Chandler, Kobe, and a few other guys just screaming at us like, hey, this guy's clearly the best guy left. And Chandler proved that the Shrine Bowl dominated there, had a great pro day workout, and he's been busy AF, as the kids say, during this draft process after his pro day. So it's much deserved. And he's going to be a top 100 pick. I think he's a guy that teams are going to not want to let get to day 3 of the draft.
Yeah, it's well deserved. It was hard to watch an offensive lineman that has a lot of guys that have been going to the draft, to the NFL and stuff, but without noticing him. And I know it was late, not this past season, but the year before, he dealt with a little bit of a back injury or something. And I think maybe that threw some people off a little bit. Great through the process. The other guy that I've seen getting a little bit more day 2 buzz, it was post combine because of the athletic testing. John Gaines out of UCLA. He's just the other guy that seems to be getting, climbing up the boards. You go look at like his mock draftable web chart, it's everything besides the size stuff is at 99. You look down the comps and it's all the who's who of all pro guards. So I think just people are latching onto that. Is that another guy that you think could go in the top 100 picks as well?
I think I'd be a little surprised just because I'm not sure he's as plug and play of a guard, but he's a center for a lot of teams. And John has been one of the faces of the UCLA program for the last 3 years. He's the guy that goes to media day and speaks first alongside Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So I think NFL teams always knew like, hey, this guy's the guy we love in our locker room. And again, like Chandler, for a very different reason, like John was always going to be a 6th, 7th round pick because he's got the size, he's athletic enough that teams knew, and he's a super high character guy. But I think the Shrine Bowl, he showed the ability to play center at a really high level. I think teams expect him to be maybe a center first at this point, and now testing the way he did, I've heard comparisons to like somewhat similar to like Jason Kelsey, which I thought was a great surprising come for me. But I think the short shuttle kind of brought teams to that kind of comparison. But a guy teams think is going to be a guard / center. Again, I think top 100 is optimistic, even though I think John is an awesome player. But again, a guy that athletic, that smart, that well regarded by that team, like 4th, 5th round at the latest would be a great value for a guy like him.
I mean, at UCLA.
Yeah.
I just want to be his teammate at UCLA, Antonio Mafi.
Yeah, geez.
Love watching that guy play. I mean, it's absolutely exceptional. He needs, maybe lose a little bit of weight, get in a little bit better shape going to the NFL, but that's an NFL team's job, right? That's part of what they have to do. But you do that, and I don't know how you don't have yourself a guy that at least sticks on your team at bare minimum for a while, but the demeanor he plays with, and for a 330-pound shorter guard, like, he does a good job in short area. He covers ground. He makes all of his landmarks that he has to, and then he buries guys left and right. Like, I love Mafi. I've been a little surprised, again, that he didn't get a combine invite even. That one took me by a surprise a little bit. And then not hearing his name much, he's a guy that I think is going to go a lot higher than what people are kind of anticipating right now.
Yeah, Mafi and Zavala were 2 of like the 4 or 5 guys I know that were like 1 or 2 votes short from the combine. So they're dead on, like, not being combine invites, not because like teams hate them. It just the way it worked out this year, they didn't get that invite, which I was pretty surprised as well. To Mafi's credit, and again, I give a lot of credit to UCLA and their strength staff and their O-line staff. He was a nose tackle that over 400 pounds when he got there. And they said, we're not going to rush this. And they kind of made a plan for him. And he lost weight over the course of 3.5, 4 years on their schedule. And they've been kind of developing this outstanding offensive guard. I think Mafi's eval's pretty easy, right? He's 340 and can bend at a really high level. Like, I don't care what he does outside of that. Like, he dominates guys and impressive too. But if you're 330, you can bend. Again, sometimes scouting's not that hard. Just draft that guy and figure it out later. But the way he dominated the second half of the season, how impressed was with the Shrine Bowl playing both guard spots. I think some teams are going to try out center a little bit. Just again, if you can play center, that's great. But I think for the most part, he's going to be, again, similar to Zavala, one of the highest non-combine draft picks in a long time. And again, I wouldn't be surprised by late round 3, but I think he's going to be somewhere on mid to early round 4, just because I think teams think, hey, I'm not sure he's a plug-and-play starter. Like to kind of get his body perfect before we kind of have him do that.
Yeah, eyeballing it. I think we have him top 20 somewhere in the interior offensive line group. Somewhere. I'm just eyeballing it, but yeah.
Feels low.
top 15? Top
19 at least. Top 19 at least.
Okay. Yeah, no, that noted. We're just going to have to retroactively fix our grades.
Yeah.
Anybody that we haven't talked along the interior offensive line that you think is going to go earlier than people are expecting?
Juice Scruggs, Penn State. I think we mentioned a lot of centers on this in this interior discussion, but I bet Juice is right alongside them, if not goes above one of those guys. And I think for a lot of teams I've talked to, like, he's in that same tier depending on your scheme. Like, I know one team that has Juice above John Michael Schmitz, right? I'm not saying that's for every team or a lot of teams, right? But that's kind of where the tier he's in. And he had, talking with scouts, thankfully matched up what I saw as well. I thought he had the best, and every team I've talked to so far said he had the best offensive line performance at the Shrine Bowl. He was offensive line number 1, didn't lose a rep all week, really impressed. I talked to an area scout just earlier today about it, being like, yeah, the guy was like unbelievable. He was better than I thought he'd be. And he's had some health issues at Penn State, which maybe hurts him a little bit, but I think most of that stuff got cleared at the combine and plug and play into offensive lineman. Again, I don't think he goes middle to late day 2, but I wouldn't rule out mid to late day 2. And then I think early day 3, he's played guard, he's played center. He's been really impressive too. And then one more guy, I guess I'll name too, Jordan McFadden at Clemson. Played tackle in college, would have played center at the Shrine Bowl if he was healthy, had a great pro day workout, great combine performance in terms of interviews and all that stuff. And I think he's a guy that could be an early day 3 pick as well.
I really enjoyed him personally.
Yeah.
I think we might still have him as a tackle, even though he's a little bit on the shorter side, if I remember correctly. But I think the arm length cleared to play tackle, so like he's a tackle kick inside the guard kind of guy, I think, for us, if I remember correctly. So those are some interesting guys there for sure. This offensive line class is going to be interesting to see where they all go, if that affects the Chiefs, how it affects the Chiefs draft, especially in the first 2 rounds. That's going to do it for the KCSN Draft Show. Thank you all so much, and we'll catch you later.
Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, the fastest growing sports media network in Kansas City. Check out these videos that feature our team of more than 15 former players, insiders, and analysts, bringing you the best Chiefs coverage you can find. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.